But there were three things my dad used to say every night that would drive me crazy as a little boy. And maybe your dad, maybe your mom used to say things like this. The first, at the dinner table. Like many little boys, I didn't like to eat my lima beans, my vegetables. I would try to get away without. My dad wouldn't let me leave until I finished my plate. So I finished everything on my plate. And my dad, invariably, almost every night, would tell me, now, son, you need to eat your vegetables. He'd say, there are starving children in China. You better eat your vegetables tonight. I never understood what that meant. I always wanted to say to him, well, Dad, why don't we mail them my vegetables? That way they'll be happy, I'll be happy. We solved two problems at one time. But it didn't matter. Every night, there are starving children in China, you better finish your vegetables. The second thing my dad would say that I never understood, whenever I would come home with a test or a report card, it didn't matter how well I had done. He would always want me to do better. If you got an 85, he wanted a 90. If you got a 90, he wanted a 95. If you got a 95, he wanted 100. And if you'd ever try to defend yourself by saying, well, none of my friends did that well, he'd always say the same thing. If all your friends jumped off the bridge, would you jump off the bridge? I have no idea what that had to do with my report card, but he always acted like that was the end of the discussion. I better go work harder. But there was a third thing that my dad would say would also drive me crazy. My dad would tell my brother and me every day. He'd say, sons, you should get up every day and give thanks to God that you were born in the greatest country in the history of the world. You should give thanks to America. I understand now what he meant, but you know, as a child, that really didn't mean a whole lot. You kind of roll your eyes and think, well, of course I'm an American. What else would I be? Everybody I've met is an American. I mean, it's kind of, I didn't really understand what he was trying to teach me, what he was trying to tell me. But my dad would say something else. He would say, sons, he would tell my brother, and he'd say, sons, look, I'm not going to give you a famous last name. I'm not going to leave you an inheritance, but I'm going to make sure you get a great education. Because if you work hard in this country, there's no limit to what you can accomplish. That's what it means to live the American dream. You see, my dad knew something about the American dream. My dad, and every one of us has a story like this in your families. My dad wanted 9. My dad grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. My dad was the first and only child in his family to get past the 5th grade. I know because I've heard these stories every single day of my life. I mean, you think your dad was telling me, when I tried to ask my dad for an allowance, I'd get a lecture. My dad would say, an allowance? He'd say, how much money do you think you should be paying me for all the food you eat, the clothes you wear, and the roof I put on top of your head? He'd say, an allowance? He'd say, you know how lucky you are when I was growing up? Apparently he had to walk uphill to get to school. And then at the end of the day, they turn around and walk uphill to get home from school as well. Apparently they couldn't afford school buses or downhill when he was growing up. They were so poor. Now the reason I tell you all that is that my parents have lived the American dream. Over 40 years ago, they moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so that my mom could study nuclear physics at LSU. My mom was pregnant with me. My dad, my mom, they didn't know anything. They arrived with simply their faith, their confidence that if you worked hard in this country, you could do well. My dad didn't want a handout. He didn't want a government check. He simply got the phone book, opened it up to the yellow pages, and started calling company after company after company until somebody would hire him. Indeed, 6 months later, when I was born, he had gotten a job by then. He was paying and putting food on the table, providing rent on that apartment. When I was born at the same hospital, by the way, where my children were born many years later. 2 of my children. When I was born, my parents' insurance didn't cover me. I was what you would call a pre-existing condition. Now, I didn't pre-exist their marriage, don't get me wrong. I just pre-existed their insurance coverage. I've been called a lot of things in my political career, but a pre-existing condition is what I was called when I was born. The insurance wouldn't cover me. So my dad literally shook hands with the doctor and promised to pay him every month until he paid the bill in full. No forms, no paperwork. My 2 oldest children were born at that same hospital. I had great insurance coverage. It took me hours to fill out the paperwork before they admitted my wife before our babies were born there. But it was a simpler time back then. I don't know if that would work today. I asked my dad, how do you pay for a baby on installment? I mean, if you skip a payment, what are they going to do? Can they take the baby back? Do they come and show up and repossess your baby? He said, son, you were such a bad little baby. I would have skipped the payment just to send you back to the hospital if they would take you back. But you know, we did miss a payment because you just didn't do that back then. My dad made those payments. And indeed, he wasn't wealthy, but he made sure that my brother and me, we got a great education. His fundamental faith, his belief in the American system and the American dream is that if you worked hard and you got a great education, you could grow up and be whatever you want to be in this great country. And that's what this election is about. I want to start by talking about what we have done in Louisiana to preserve that American dream. And I want to talk about what we need to do as a party, as a country, to preserve that dream for our children going forward. Let me start in Louisiana. My parents came over 40 years ago to Louisiana, to America, because it was a land of opportunity. For 25 years in a row, my state has been the only state in the South to lose people to outmigration. They're moving away to find jobs and opportunities in other states. How ironic that 40 years ago my parents would come to this land for opportunity, and then now they would have to watch their children and grandchildren leave that same land. Because that opportunity that was there 40 years ago is not there today. And there were a lot of reasons we were losing our people. But when I ran for governor, when I was getting elected my first term, I made it very clear our top priority would be to bring our children and grandchildren home. My mom says that's a good thing. She says, son, I love you. But be clear, if we could have had those grandchildren first, she said, you wouldn't be here today. So she said, you better not take them out of Louisiana. Well, you know, within our first 30 days, we convened a special session on ethics. Now, why did we start there? Let's be honest. When you heard the governor of Louisiana was going to come talk to you tonight, I'm sure you thought about a few of my more colorful predecessors. I mean, think about it. When I was elected governor, one of my predecessors was in federal prison. 3 insurance commissioners in a row have gone to federal prison. A former president of our Senate was in federal prison. A former elections commissioner was in federal prison. An agricultural commissioner was under indictment. We have a congressman, a former congressman, $90,000 in the freezer on his way to federal prison. I can keep going on and on. I think you get the point. Everybody had their favorite joke and story about Louisiana's politicians. Billy Tozak, who served in the Congress, was David. He had a great line. He represented South Louisiana. He'd say, look, at any given moment in time, he'd say half my people are underwater, the other half are under indictment any given moment in time in the state of Louisiana. Everybody had their favorite joke, but here's the problem, those jokes weren't funny. LSU did a study. They said the number one thing we could do to attract investment and jobs was to crack down on corruption. And I won't bore you with the details, but we passed the country's toughest ethics laws in that special session. We went from 44th worst, according to the Center for Public Integrity on legislative disclosure, to number 1 in the entire country. The Better Government Association's Integrity Index at the top 5, but we didn't stop there. We said who you know should not be more important than what you know when it comes to investing in our state, but this is just the first step towards creating jobs. We had a second special session. In that session, we got rid of the taxes on debt, new equipment, utilities, enacted the largest income tax cut in my state's history. But we did more than that. See, I've got 2 simple ideas when it comes to tax policy. Number 1 is this. If you want to encourage an activity, if you want to encourage more of an activity in your state, don't tax it. Don't raise taxes. Secondly, I made it very clear to my legislature, as long as I'm governor, we're not raising any taxes in the state of Louisiana, period. And we have not done that. The reality is every governor's got to make this decision during a tough economy. You make the tough choices in government and you shift that burden to your families, to your businesses struggling to pay their bills. We've had to make tough choices. Since I've been governor, we've cut the budget 26%. We've got fewer state employees than we've had in over 25 years. We have privatized some operations and set real priorities. The reality is, while the national credit rating has gotten worse, our credit rating has been improved 6 different times. We have the best credit rating we've had in over 25 years in Louisiana. And we've done other things to tighten our belt to do more with less. In other words, we have said this. We've said we're going to do more with less. We're not going to shift this burden to our families, to our employers, who we know are already struggling to pay their bills. We did other things as well. We invested a record amount in infrastructure, more and roads, in the last couple of governors combined. We have the number 1 rated workforce training program in the entire country, but the important thing is results. Every month since I've been governor, our unemployment rate has been below the national and southern averages. After 25 years of losing our people, 4 years in a row, every year that I've been governor, more people move into Louisiana rather than leaving our state. Our per capita income has gone up. We have been ranked the #1 state in the South 3 years in a row by Southern Business Development, the #1 state in the country for per capita economic development, the most improved state by Site Selection Paulina magazine, the most improved state by Forbes. If you look at the competitive rankings along with Wisconsin and other states. In other words, on every major national ranking, we've got the highest ranking we have ever had for economic development, for business climate, and here's the most important. During the worst national recession any of us has probably lived through, we've now announced economic development deals creating tens of thousands of jobs, bringing over $10 billion in private capital investment in our state, including the creation of a new Fortune 500 company headquartered in our state. But most importantly, our children and grandchildren are beginning to come back home. Now, the reason I want to start with Louisiana is to say this simple. Conservative principles work. So often we see politicians and all they do is talk. So often we hear commentators tell us the way for Republicans to win elections is to become less conservative. And I'm here to tell you that when we actually implement conservative principles, they work. We lose elections not because we are too conservative. We lose elections because we stop being faithful to our conservative principles. And I want to transition now, not just to talk about Louisiana, but talk to you about our party and our country. I was reelected last year with the largest margin any incumbent governor has enjoyed since we moved to our modern system of elected governors in Louisiana. Now, a lot of people, after we had that margin of victory, would have said, that's great. For your second term, you can coast. No reason to tackle any big policy challenges. Now's the time just to kind of defend your record and just kind of take it easy. Instead, this session, we're in the middle of our legislative session, we've tackled two of the biggest, most important priorities for our state. One is educational reform, and second is state pension reform. I'm going to start talking first about educational reform. Why I think this needs to be a top priority for us as Republicans, for us as a party, but also as a country. Why is educational reform so important? You know, we believe as a party that the circumstances of your birth, your zip code, your race, your gender, the socioeconomic status of your parents should not determine your outcome as an adult in this great country. That's something that is the bedrock, the foundational principle of what it means to be a conservative, what it means to be a Republican. We believe in an aspirational society. That if you work hard and apply yourself, you can do better than your parents. You can create that next successful business. You can succeed beyond your wildest dreams. And that's not true in every society. That's not true in every country. But inherent in that promise, inherent in that dream, that American dream, is the fact that we have got to give every child a great education. In today's global economy, without that great education, our children will not be able to compete and succeed in this economy. If you're 55 years old, that cohort in America today, we rank #1 in educational outcomes in the entire world, as we should. If you're in your 20s, we rank 16th in the world. I don't know about you, but that is simply unacceptable to me as a Republican and as an American. Well, what can we do to improve education for our children? Well, the reality is we've done several things. During my first term, for example, in Louisiana, even as we cut the budget 26%, we increased K-12 spending by 9%. We enacted many different laws like the Red Tape Reduction Act to cut down paperwork in our classrooms. We enacted stronger laws as well to, for example, a value-added assessment to evaluate our teachers based on their students' performance on their first day of school versus their last day of that academic year, so that we're tying teacher evaluations to student achievement. So those that start below grade level and they get up to grade level, we actually recognize teachers who accomplish that. One of the most important bills we passed was the Teachers' Bill of Rights. Why was that so important? We're finally paying our teachers at the Southern average. We brought them up to the Southern average for the first time in a long time, a couple of years ago. But we learned the #1 reason we lose good teachers. And in Louisiana, by the way, 50% of our new teachers, our College of Education graduates, aren't teaching in public schools 5 years after they graduate in Louisiana. But the #1 reason they're leaving is not pay. The #1 reason they're leaving is the environment in the classroom. It's the lack of discipline. You don't believe me? Go visit a local classroom. You'll see it's not like what you and I remember when we were growing up. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up and I graduated from public schools, I was more afraid of my parents than my teachers.